In this video, we're going to do an introduction to the Aquarius rating curve environment. For this, we're going to start from the Aquarius whiteboard environment, and you can see here I've imported a little bit of raw data. In my case, I've done it from file, but you may have done it from your database, an external database, or you may have had a saved whiteboard where you had some data on it. The two pieces of data that I have is one, a time series of some water level data. It's going to be fairly useful if we're going to develop a rating curve. And the second is some rating measurements, a series of surveys of the site's flow and gauge heights at particular dates and times. And those are the measurements we're going to use to develop the rating curve. And just so we have a little bit of data in the rating curve environment, I'm going to pull out rating curve development toolbox. I'm going to wire in a little bit of data to that toolbox just so we have some data in the panes while we're moving around. In this case, I'm going to wire across the rating measurements, and I'm also going to pass across the time series. This is actually going to be very useful when we come to shifting the rating curve. We'll get to that a few videos down the line. So I'm going to double click to start the rating curve development environment, and it'll start up, and in a second it should start displaying my data. I'm also going to get a message that the units passed in on my incoming rating measurements are going to override the units of the system. So it looks like that's all happened. So just a tour of what we have in terms of the rating curve development environment. There's a lot of information displayed here, quite a lot of colors, quite a lot of measurements, quite a lot of menus. So just by way of introduction, I'm going to start up here in the top left. This is what's called the overview pane. Always shows you complete length and breadth of your rating curve, all of your measurements, all of your rating curves, all of your shifts. And when we zoom in on the rating curve, we're actually going to work down here in either the time series pane, rating zoom 2, which is in rectilinear space or arithmetic space, rating zoom 1, which is in log-log space, which gives us a bit of a different perspective on the rating measurements we have. We also have each one of these measurements up in the site visit data pane. Now this pane is a little bit cramped where it is by default, and there's quite a lot of information in here. So what I tend to do is use these little auto hide buttons, little pins on the top corners of the panes. You'll notice that all the panes have them, and what that does is it pushes that pane across to the side of the window. You'll see it flash there in just a second. There we go. And it comes across to the side. Now this is auto hidden. If you click on it on the side, it'll come back out. I can expand it, I can use it just like an everyday pane over here. And when you click elsewhere in Aquarius, it goes and hides itself. So this is common to all of the Aquarius environment, but it's especially useful in the rating curve development environment, just because there's so much information here. Now the site visit data pane actually contains all the information about my site surveys, things like the measurement IDs, the dates and times those measurements were taken, the stages at the stage values of when we were out there in the field, discharge, the quality is a % error associated with that measurement or unspecified if we don't know it, conditions, whether it was clear, whether there was scour on the control, low water, high water, floods, all that sort of information, as well as additional information like width, area, effective depth, method used, number of verticals taken, stage change. And then we have some derived columns over here on the right. So your % error away from the rating curve. So if you've got a rating curve drawn already, this measurement is going to have a certain percentage error away from it. If you have a shifted curve, what that measurement falls relative to the shifted curve. And then your true error percentage. Because shifts can time prorate, we can actually get interesting rating curves that are prorating back and forth into each other. So that's the true or the time prorated error associated with it. We've also got things like highlight colors associated with measurements, and we can go and look at the color classification methods that we can have here. So we can color classify our measurements based on quality, based on control conditions, true difference from the rating curve, comparison between the quality of the measurement and true difference, or we can just choose none as our color classification. You can also highlight measurements and assign various colors to them. You can just highlight a whole bunch of rows and then just customize the colors for them. We can also dump these measurements out to a CSV if we want to, so we also have those options. So that's sort of the amount of functionality we have in site visit data. Moving across here to Rating Curve Manager, this is where we manage multiple rating curves. So I'm just going to expand that a little bit. There is quite a bit of information in there. We can go down a little bit. So various rating curves will have dates of applicability. We may have a large water event that comes through and blows out our control or changes our channel, and then we're going to have a different hydraulic curve essentially that's going to relate the stage to the discharge. And for that we're going to want to have multiple rating curves. In this case I only have one curve right now. It's rating curve 000. But if you have multiple tabs open here, if you use the little clone function, the dolly the sheep, to clone your rating curves multiple times, you can assign them various periods of dates and times. Now this is important when we come to doing computations with a rating curve. You need to have at least one date and time associated with a rating curve in order for any flow data to be calculated. So if we've got a very stable control, this just could be starting from 1 AD and running all the way forward into the future. But we definitely want to control these. Next along the list is actually the shift manager, and this controls the dates and times when we have shifts to the rating curve. We're going to get into all of this stuff in a lot more detail when it comes to the rating development video and the shifting video, which are going to be the subsequent two videos to this one. But just by way of introduction, shifts to a rating curve are for temporary transitions, things like perhaps ice effects or weed growth or temporary scour or deposition on top of the control features, all those sorts of things that may affect a rating curve very slightly, especially down at the bottom end, that you just want to temporarily adjust the curve for. So that's what we use the shift manager for. And again, we have start dates and end dates and the status of whether they're on or off and those sorts of things. In terms of the offset manager, this is very critical when it comes to drawing rating curves. Typically, when we measure gauge heights or water levels, they're relative to some arbitrary datum. They could be meters above sea level, they could be feet above a certain number of survey points, so they don't actually correspond to the hydraulic head forcing water through that control. And in order for us to apply hydraulic equations like Manning's equation, we need to get hydraulic heads. So first we need to offset all of our gauge height measurements downwards usually. Usually we have very large positive gauge heights. We need to offset them downwards, and so they correspond to the hydraulic head, and we're going to get nice straight relationships in log-log space. In order to accommodate multiple control features, that's why we can have multiple offsets. So if you have a section control that drowns out at a certain flow point, and then you have a channel control, you're going to have a different effective point of zero flow in your channel flow than when you're in your section control. We're going to talk a lot more about this, but just by way of introduction, this is the offset manager, and this is where we control all of the offsets and the breakpoints in between different offsets. Down here is the shift diagram. This is actually, we're going to build shifts. We can also build shifts on the rating curves, and this corresponds, of course, to what we're doing in the shift manager. We also have the time series view right here, which shows us our measurements plotted against time. In this case, you can see all our measurements nicely labeled with their various measurement IDs associated with them. You can see them right here, the measurement IDs in the site visit data pane. Those measurement IDs also come up in the time series view. We actually also have the time series values plotted here. Now, right now, the scale is incorrect. So actually what we want to go and do is go to the setup menu, and we want to set up the site and make sure that we're plotting the independent variable, essentially the water levels. So this can happen by default, and you can see now I've changed the scale here and my time series is plotting correctly. If we just zoom in a little bit on that, we're going to see the actual water levels and the measurements taken associated with them. So you can see my various measurements over the course of 2007 corresponding with the hydrograph taken over 2007, including a little bit of a gap here, probably due to a sensor malfunction. We have tools here for turning measurements on and off, of course, like we do in all the other panes, and you can gray them out, and you can, of course, switch them back on by double-clicking on them with the other tools. We're also seeing down at the bottom the period manager, so back up here to the rating period manager. The dates of applicability of a rating curve show up as bars down here at the bottom of the time series view. And in the shift manager, the dates and times associated with various shifts will show up down at the bottom in the shifting. Now this bottom line here, data aging, this is only for folks who are running within the USGS NWIS system or for co-operators. And this will show you the data aging code associated with the various rating curves or various shifts associated with the rating curves. Now, other things we may want to have a look at are the view menu, quite a lot of information in there. A very useful tool is a default layout. Now, I've moved things around a little bit, I've scaled panes a little bit, I've docked some things off to the side. If I go to the default layout, everything is going to snap back to the default. We're going to see rating zoom 2 or rating zoom 1 down at the bottom. Our site visit data is back in the middle. We also have the offset manager back where it was, scaled to exactly how it was. This is very useful. The other things that are very useful here are turning panes on and off. If we want to actually shut things off, like for example, if we don't want to see the site visit data, we can exit off. And if we do that, go back to the view menu, you can see that site visit data now doesn't have a blue outline around it. We can turn it back on right there. Those tools are also available through the top toolbar, so you can turn things on and off. I can turn my site visit data on and off right here, and you can see it'll turn on, it'll turn back off. Other thing that's fairly important is rating overlays. So if we have an existing rating curve, say a discretized curve that you built on paper or an old rating table that someone had built, you can add an overlay curve. In addition, on the whiteboard, you can actually pass that in. It's one of the ports on the input of the rating curve development toolbox. In this case, we don't have any curves that we could overlay because we don't have any curves, period. We don't have multiple curves, don't have shifts, those sorts of things. Another thing I should definitely show here is the help menu. So in the help menu, if you click on the user's manual, it'll bring up the help for the rating curve development toolbox. We can expand our way through here. Talks about much of the stuff I've talked about in this video so far in terms of what's in all of the various menus, the setup menu, the overlay rating, but also talks about what's in all of the different panes, including some of the more complex panes like the offset manager and talking about things like effective points of zero flow and offsets, and what happens when you're dealing with multiple offsets. So it gives an example here with a bit of a diagram. So there's certainly a lot of information in here in terms of what we should be expecting in the rating curve development environment. There are plenty of examples that we actually work through. So that's more or less it in terms of an introduction. The next video we're going to talk about actually developing a bit of a rating curve.